As part of Arena Stage's recent production of the award-winning play, The Laramie Project, and its sequel, The Laramie Project 10 Years Later, Metro Weekly held a community forum on the impact of the plays and how our society continues to deal with hate crimes and bias. The panel featured playwright Moises Kaufman and members of Tectonic Theater Project, who wrote and produced the plays, as well as Tom Perez, Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and Andrew Barnett, Executive Director of the Sexual Minority Youth Assistance League.
That there are many reasons why the murder of Matthew Shepard became what it became. One was the symbolic nature of the crime, that it was a sort of crucifixion, and that you can't do that in this culture without getting an incredible amount of attention. The other was because he was, young, very photogenic, white, a university student, so that his murder means something very different, that a Latino drag queen who goes home with someone gets murdered at their home. In our culture, that is not yet a worthy victim. And so, to me, one of the reasons why I wanted to write this play was because when Matthew was murdered in 1998, it was everywhere. It became very clear to me very quickly that it was a watershed historical moment for our culture. And that from then on, people would be able to say Matthew Shepard, and it would mean much more than just a person. It would mean an event. And there is a way in which what I was saying at the interview was that I thought if it had happened in 1988, exactly the same crime, exactly the same way, it wouldn't have had that resonance. And I feel that it was because we as a culture were ready to have that kind of conversation. Unfortunately, we are not ready to have many conversations right now, and I think that's why it's we still have worthy victims and unworthy victims, and since Matthew Shepard, there have been many murders as horrific, and we haven't heard about them. So I think that there's still many things that we're not ready to hear.
Okay.
Actually, one of the other things I was kind of curious about, and Matthew Shepard against hate crimes legislation actually finally passed into law, which was considered a very large victory. One of the things that the Department of Justice is tasked with, or has taken upon itself, is going across the country and providing a lot of support and training for people. What's the mood out there in terms of the people that you're training, the police departments and things? Has the awareness been raised? Are people hearing what they're needing to hear?
I think the training that has gone on, and by way of background, we've probably trained about 6,000 law enforcement officers across the country. The Shepards have joined us. Dave O'Malley has become a remarkably passionate spokesperson. And it's one thing for Tom Perez to get in front of a group of law enforcement and talk about what the hate crimes law means. It's another thing for Dave O'Malley. Dave O'Malley was the chief investigator in the Laramie Police Department, later became the police chief. It's a far different thing, and it's one of the remarkably powerful things about what we're doing right now, to have a cop talk to 350 cops in Nebraska or Arkansas or Georgia. And we started out by going into the states where there are no hate crimes laws, Indiana, and to talk about his own homophobia and the transformation that resulted from this case. And then to have gay officers come up and talk about how they do their job. And you see the transformation almost before your very eyes. And we will not simply measure the success of this new law by the number of prosecutions we bring. That's one metric, and we brought our first case 10 days ago. We indicted it in New Mexico. But we measure progress by these face-to-face contacts, and the number of officers who have had the courage at the end of these things, at the end of these trainings, to say, I am here, I am ignorant, and I want to learn. That's a remarkable step forward. And that is a very important part of the enduring legacy of this bill.
I think, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, Andy interviewed Dave O'Malley, and I think
I spoke with Dave extensively about this very thing, and it was one of the things that he's taken the most pride in. And you know, he got all like peacocky about it. I mean, he was really, you know, to go into a room of people who don't want to hear what you have to say and be as confrontational in a good way with them as he is. He said sometimes he goes into a room full, you know, with 500 cops in God knows where, and says, you know, listen, let's just say you're in your kitchen, you know, and you're just having your breakfast, and your son comes in and he says to you, Dad, I'm gay. And just lets that question linger with these cops. And, you know, the way that he said he gets everybody's attention, and then he takes them through, you know, his experience of working on this case and his life prior to working on this case and afterwards. And that kind of, it was fascinating and incredible, the kind of work that he's doing all over the country. And he was also, just in this past election, elected a sheriff of Albany County. So he's now sheriff.
In this play is the undersheriff, so they're working together now.
One of the things you're portraying. Oh, I'm sorry. I do have. Somebody reminded me that I needed to use mic. Yes. You all are essentially portraying a city, a town, and two different places. One from the original Laramie Project, and then 10 years later. When you're performing it, do you feel? Are you looking at two extremely different characters in that 10-year passage of time? How much has it changed, do you think?
Well, I think it depends a lot on the character, you know, and I think that the people who were closer to the event at the time that Matthew was murdered were of course changed a lot more dramatically right away, and so they talked about their change in retrospect. The change that we saw is more in the community as a whole, right? And that's a lot of what the second play is about. So I wouldn't say that, for example, Jonas Slonaker, he's Jonas Slonaker, you know, he's got the same opinions and the same attitudes, and he's always like, I feel like I'm constantly in a fight with Laramie, Wyoming, you know, because he's got like this really clear idea, you know, but he's gotten older, you know, so he's aged and he's calmed down a little bit, but just a little bit, you know, but the town itself is populated by all of these different sorts of people in the second play, which I don't want to say too much about it because I imagine many of you are coming, but it's those people who have changed. It's kind of the story and the kind of tone of the culture that's changed as it's moved further and further away from the crime. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. Sorry, I was thinking like three questions at once. You all have had the fortune of creating a play that's had impact, I think, you know, across the country. Do you feel that I've lived here for a long time, but I'm the product of rural America. I grew up with a lot of the same kinds of things in a town of like 1,000 people. Do you feel that the Laramie Project and Laramie itself is representative of America in some way, and how it deals with these issues, and how it's managed to either face the hate within the community or learn how to cope with it? Do you think that it's representative of the entire country, or is it in a different place than the rest of the country just by the way by its own experience?
I think that right now we have the great good fortune that the Laramie Project over the last 10 years has been one of the most performed plays in America. We get emails all the time from people in every community where it's performed that starts with, Laramie is just like my town. And one of those emails was from Berlin. So I think that whether it's a large town or a small town, the reason why we went to Laramie was because we felt that Matthew Shepard would trigger a conversation, and that we were able to record that conversation. We would be able to gather a document that talked about how the whole nation was speaking and the whole nation was feeling about these things. And as you saw now, and as you'll see later on tonight, everyone in America can find somebody in the play that speaks for them. And I think that that is a great generator of conversations. And I think that it's pretty clear that we're in a kind of a war right now, specifically about these issues, specifically about issues of social justice and about, you know, rights in general, not only gay rights. And I think that this perhaps is a way in which each town can talk to itself about these things.